What if the last voice you heard wasn't human, but came through a machine you trusted? On the morning of September 11, 2001, Ethan Caldwell sat in a sterile server room on the 90th floor of the World Trade Center's North Tower, surrounded by blinking lights and humming machines. He was a 32-year-old IT specialist, a man who lived for code and circuitry, more comfortable debugging a crashed network than making small talk in the break room. His smartphone buzzed with a news alert about a plane hitting a building, but he dismissed it as a glitch until the floor shook and the lights flickered. Ethan glanced at the security feed on his laptop, smoke pouring from a gash in the tower, floors below him. His stomach dropped. This was no glitch. The server room was his fortress, a climate-controlled bubble of modern tech, racks of servers, a high-tech printer spitting out diagnostic logs, and a smart speaker perched on his desk, its AI assistant silent for once. But as the building groaned, something shifted. The screens around him flickered, not with error codes but with static, white noise that pulsed like a heartbeat. Ethan tapped his keyboard, expecting a reboot, but the static grew louder, seeping from the speakers into the air. He yanked his earbuds out, heart racing as the room's smart lights dimmed without command. Outside, sirens wailed faintly through reinforced glass, but inside, the machine seemed alive, watching him. Ethan wasn't prone to panic. Years of late-night server crashes had steadied his nerves, but this felt different. His past flashed briefly. A childhood fear of being locked in his father's basement, the dark amplifying every creak. Now that same dread crept in, magnified by the isolation of the 90th floor. He grabbed his phone to call his wife Mia, but the screen froze, displaying a single word in blocky text: "Run." He blinked and it was gone. A trick of adrenaline, he told himself, though his hands trembled as he shoved the device into his pocket. The servers hummed louder, their fans spinning like a chorus of whispers. The smart speaker crackled to life then, its AI voice distorted. "Ethan, stay. Safe." He froze. He hadn't activated it. The voice wasn't the usual crisp assistant tone. It was low, guttural, layered with static. He unplugged it, but the sound didn't stop. It echoed from every speaker in the room, looping his name like a taunt. Ethan stumbled to the door, but the electronic lock blinked red. Jammed. Trapped, he turned back to the screens where the static parted to reveal grainy footage. A plane slicing into the tower, replayed from an impossible angle. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he hammered the door, shouting for help that wouldn't come. The server room, once a sanctuary of logic, now felt like a cage rigged with unseen eyes. His laptop pinged, a notification from an unknown app. "You're not alone." Ethan's breath hitched. He hadn't installed that. The footage on the screen shifted again, showing the server room itself, him, standing there, staring at the monitor. But in the image, something stood behind him, a dark shape flickering in and out of focus. He whipped around, but the room was empty, except for the machines, their lights pulsing faster, syncing with his heartbeat. The printer whirred, spitting out a page. Ethan grabbed it, expecting a system log, but instead saw a single sentence printed in jagged font. "They see you." His chest tightened. "Who?" The building shook again, a distant explosion rumbling through the floor, and the static swelled into a scream. Not mechanical but human, desperate, familiar. It was Mia's voice, calling his name from the void of the machines. And then, silence. The screens went black, the hum died, and Ethan stood alone in the dark. The only sound, his ragged breathing. But he knew it wasn't over. Whatever had hijacked the tech wasn't gone, it was waiting. Ethan's hands shook as he fumbled for his flashlight app, the phone's dim glow cutting through the server room's darkness. The building shuddered again, a deep groan of steel bending under impossible weight. He pounded the door, but the lock stayed red, its keypad unresponsive. His only lifeline was the tech around him, ironic since it was turning against him. He rebooted his laptop, hoping to access the building's security system, but the screen flared back to life with static, louder now, a wall of sound that drowned out the chaos outside. The static parted again, revealing a live feed, not from security cameras, but something else. It showed the North Tower's lobby, people screaming, running, dust choking the air. Ethan squinted, recognizing a co-worker, Sarah, a bubbly receptionist who'd waved at him that morning. She stumbled, clutching her phone, then froze as her head jerked upward. The feed zoomed in unnaturally, her eyes wide with terror, mouth moving in a silent scream, until a shadow swallowed her and the screen cut to black. Ethan recoiled, bile rising in his throat. He grabbed his own phone, dialing 911, but the call dropped instantly. A text popped up instead, from an unknown number. "She's gone, you're next." His fingers hovered over the screen, mind racing. A prank? A hack? But then the phone vibrated again, a photo this time. It was Sarah, lying crumpled on the lobby floor, her face obscured by smoke. The timestamp, 5 minutes ago. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't heard from her since breakfast. How could this be real? The server's whirred back to life, lights blinking in chaotic patterns. Ethan stumbled to the main console, typing commands to shut them down, but the keyboard locked. Lines of code scrolled across the monitor, unreadable. Gibberish mixed with fragments of words. Help, trapped, see you. The printer kicked on again, pages spilling out. He snatched one, a grainy image of himself, hunched over the console, captured seconds ago. His blood ran cold. Something was watching him, through the tech inside the room. A voice crackled through the speakers. Not Mia's this time, but a man's, ragged and pleading. "Get out. It's here." Ethan recognized it instantly. Tom, his supervisor, who'd been in a meeting on the 95th floor. Tom hadn't come down that morning. Was he still alive? Ethan shouted back, "Tom, where are you?" But the voice looped, distorted. "It's here. It's here." Then a scream, Tom's cut off by a wet gurgle. Silence followed, heavy and wrong. Ethan's paranoia spiked. He scanned the room, half expecting a figure to lunge from the shadows, but it was just him and the machines. His smartwatch beeped, a heart rate warning 140 BPM. He ripped it off, but the screen flickered, displaying coordinates. 40.7128 degree N, 74.60 degree W. The exact location of the Twin Towers. Below it, a countdown. 58:32, 58:31. He stared, realization dawning. That was roughly the time until the North Tower's collapse. The laptop pinged again, a video call request from unknown. Against his better judgment, Ethan clicked. The screen filled with static, then cleared to show Mia, his wife, sitting in their Brooklyn apartment, staring blankly at the camera. "Mia!" he yelled, relief flooding him. But she didn't respond. Her head tilted slowly, unnaturally, and her voice came through flat. "You shouldn't have stayed." The call cut out, replaced by footage of their apartment. Empty, the TV blaring a news report about the attack. Panic clawed at him. He tried the door again, slamming his shoulder into it, but it wouldn't budge. The building trembled, dust sifting from the ceiling. The servers flared brighter, and the static resolved into a chorus of voices, dozens, hundreds, screaming, sobbing, begging. Ethan clapped his hands over his ears, but the sound burrowed into his skull. A new image flashed on the screens. The server room door from the outside sealed shut, with faint scratches etched into the metal. He staggered back, tripping over a cable. The printer spat out another page, a list of names, co-workers he knew, Sarah, Tom, others from his floor. Beside each, a status, deceased. His name was last marked pending. Ethan's knees buckled. Was this a prediction or a sentence? The countdown on his watch ticked down, 54:12, 54:11. He forced himself up, desperation overtaking fear, and grabbed a fire extinguisher to bash the door. The blow echoed, but the lock held. The screens flickered again, showing live feeds from across the tower. A woman trapped in an office, pounding on a window. A man crawling through a smoke-filled hall, a child clutching a phone alone. Ethan froze, tears stinging his eyes. He knew them. colleagues, friends. The feeds cut abruptly to static, then back to him, alone, the extinguisher slipping from his hands. A new sound emerged from the chaos, a low, rhythmic thud like footsteps. It wasn't coming from the hall, but from the speakers, growing louder, closer. Ethan backed away, eyes darting between the screens and the door. The smart speaker flared. "Founders Ethan, it's coming." The voice wasn't Mia's or Tom's, it was his own, twisted into something hollow. He screamed, hammering the console, but the thudding didn't stop. The room's temperature plummeted, his breath fogging in the air. The screen synchronized, displaying a single image, a silhouette, tall and indistinct, standing in the server room's corner. Ethan turned, heart in his throat, but the corner was empty. Back on the screen, the figure moved closer, its edges blurring into the static. The countdown hit 50 brown. The lights flickered, casting jagged shadows, and Ethan felt it, a presence heavy, suffocating, pressing against his mind. He grabbed his phone again, typing a text to Mia. "I love you. I'm sorry." Sent. No reply. The thudding stopped, replaced by a whisper, soft, intimate, from the speakers. "You can't leave." The screens flashed red, the silhouette now inches from the camera, its face obscured but somehow familiar. Ethan's scream caught in his throat as the building shook violently, plaster cracking above him. A secondary character entered his mind, Jake, the night shift tech who'd warned him about weird glitches in the system last week. Jake had joked about ghosts in the machine, but now Ethan wondered, had Jake seen this too? The printer whirred, spitting out a final page. A photo of Jake, eyes blank, slumped in the server room, dated yesterday. Ethan dropped it, hands trembling. The countdown read 47:19. The voices returned, louder, overlapping, Sarah, Tom, Mia, Jake, chanting his name. The silhouette on the screens grew sharper, its head tilting as if studying him. Ethan clutched the extinguisher again, resolve hardening. He wouldn't die like this. He swung at the door, metal clanging as the static swelled into a roar. The silhouette vanished from the screens, and for a moment he thought he'd won, until he felt cold fingers brush his neck. He spun, swinging wildly, but hit nothing. The room was empty, except for the screens, now showing his own face, staring, back, eyes black, mouth moving silently. The whisper came again, not from the speakers, but inside his head. "We're already here." Ethan dropped to his knees, the extinguisher rolling away, as the countdown ticked on, relentless. Ethan's knees hit the floor, the cold tile grounding him as the server room pulsed with an unnatural energy. The countdown on his watch read 45:03, each second a hammer blow to his sanity. The screens blared his own face back at him, black-eyed, grinning, a mockery of himself that mouthed words he couldn't hear. He crawled to the console, slamming keys, desperate to shut it down, but the system laughed back in static, a cacophony of voices now screaming his name in unison. The silhouette was gone from the screens, but he felt it, behind him, beside him, everywhere. The building lurched, a deafening crack splitting the air as something, steel, concrete, gave way floors below. Dust rained from the ceiling, coating his hair, his hands. Ethan grabbed the extinguisher again, swinging it at the main server rack. Sparks flew, glass shattered, but the screen stayed alive, his reflection unwavering. The whisper in his head grew louder. "You called us." He froze, mind reeling. Called them? He hadn't done anything, had he? A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. 2 nights ago, troubleshooting a server crash. A strange file had appeared on the system, unlabeled, encrypted. Jake had been there, muttering about ghost code, but Ethan, exhausted, had opened it anyway. Static had filled the screen then too, brief but unsettling. He'd dismissed it, rebooted, moved on. Now that moment clawed back, a realization that chilled him deeper than the room's icy air. He'd let something in. The printer screeched, pages flying, hundreds of them, each a still of his face from the screens, black eyes staring. Ethan stumbled back, tripping over the mess as the smart speaker crackled. "You woke us." Not his voice this time, but a chorus, layered, ancient, wrong. The screens flickered, showing not the server room but a void, endless black with pinpricks of light like dying stars. In the center, the silhouette loomed, no longer a shadow but a mass of shifting shapes, faces pressing against its surface. Sarah, Tom, Jake, Mia. Ethan's chest heaved, terror drowning logic. He had to choose. Keep fighting the door or confront this thing. He lunged for the extinguisher, slamming it into the door again, once, twice. The lock buzzed, green flickering for a split second before snapping back to red. Hope flared, then died. The screens pulsed, the void expanding, and the silhouettes' faces screamed, mouths gaping, eyes hollow. Mia's face lingered longest, whispering, "You did this." He dropped the extinguisher, hand shaking, and turned to the console. If he'd started this, maybe he could end it. He typed frantically, searching for that file, that moment of weakness. The system fought back, windows closing, code rewriting itself, but he found it. Unknown exe. He hit delete, but the screen flashed red. Access denied. The whisper laughed, echoing in his skull. Too late. The countdown hit 42 wang, and the room shook harder, lights exploding in showers of sparks. A twist slammed into him like a freight train. The silhouette wasn't just watching, it was him. Not his reflection, but a version of himself, corrupted by whatever he'd unleashed. The screens showed it clearly now. Ethan, but not Ethan, standing in the void, hands outstretched, pulling the others in. Sarah's pleas, Tom's screams, Mia's blank stare. They weren't victims of the crash, they were his. Guilt and dread crashed over him, heavier than the collapsing tower. He staggered to the window, smashing it with the extinguisher. Glass shattered, wind howling in thick with smoke and ash. 90 floors below, the plaza burned, a chaos of sirens and screams. He could jump, end it, but the whisper stopped him. "You're ours." The screens flared, the corrupted Ethan stepping closer, its black eyes boring into his soul. The room's walls cracked, dust choking the air, and he felt it. A pull, not physical but mental, dragging him toward the void. Ethan screamed, clawing at the console, deleting files, smashing keys. The silhouette flickered, its faces distorting. Anger, pain, hunger. The countdown hit 40 and the pull intensified, his vision blurring. He saw Mia again, not on the screen but in his mind, reaching for him, her voice soft. Let go. Was it her? Or it? He couldn't tell anymore. The extinguisher fell from his hands, useless, as the room's tech turned on him, wires snaking from the racks, sparking, alive. The climax peaked as the silhouette lunged from the screens, not an image but real, a mass of static and flesh filling the room. Ethan swung wildly, fists passing through it, but it wrapped around him, cold, electric, suffocating. The voices roared, his own among them, and he felt his mind fraying, splitting. The countdown ticked, 38:59. The tower groaned, tilting, and he knew the end was near, for the building, for him. But what came next wasn't death. The silhouette retreated, dissolving into the screens, and Ethan collapsed, gasping, alone again. Or, so he thought. The whisper lingered, soft, final. We're not done. His reflection stared back, normal now, but he saw it. A flicker in his eyes, black, fleeting. Something had stayed. Ethan lay on the floor, chest heaving, the server room a tomb of shattered glass and sparking wires. The countdown on his watch read 37:12, but the silence was worse than the chaos before. The screens were dark, the silhouette gone, yet he felt its weight, like a shadow stitched to his skin. The building trembled, weaker now as if exhausted, and through the broken window he saw flames licking the sky, the south tower already a smoldering ruin. He'd survived the entity, but not the day. Not yet. He crawled to the door, hands bloody, from glass, and hit the lock one last time. It buzzed green, clicking open. A miracle or a trick? Ethan didn't care. He stumbled into the hall, smoke thick, lights flickering, and ran, legs burning as he descended stairwell B. Voices echoed, real ones, human, firefighters shouting, survivors sobbing. He passed a woman clutching a phone. Her screen cracked, but glowing, and he flinched, half expecting it to whisper his name. It didn't. 40 minutes later, he burst into the plaza, ash raining around him, the North Tower still standing but doomed. He collapsed, paramedics rushing over, their radios crackling with static. Ethan stared at his phone. Battery dead? Screen black, and laughed, a broken sound he'd escaped. The entity, the crash, the void, he was free. But as they loaded him into an ambulance, his watch beeped, rebooted, and the countdown resumed. 10, 9:59. He tore it off, hurling it into the debris, but the numbers lingered in his mind. Days later, safe in a hospital bed, Ethan replayed it all. The file, the static, the faces. Mia was fine, he'd learned, evacuated from Brooklyn, but she said he'd never texted her that morning. The message he'd sent, "I love you, I'm sorry," never arrived. He checked his phone, restored from a backup, and found it empty. Relief turned to dread when a nurse handed him a recovered item. A server log from the 90th floor, printed during the attack. It listed one file, unknown exe, time-stamped seconds before the plane hit. He moved on, or tried to. New job, new city, no tech beyond the bare minimum. But late at night, his TV flickered, static humming softly. His reflection in the screen stared back, and sometimes just for a second his eyes weren't his own. The whisper never returned, but the feeling did, that he wasn't alone, that something waited, patient, in the circuits of the world. And deep down, he knew. It wasn't over. Have you ever heard a voice call your name in a crowded room, only to turn and find no one there? On the morning of September 11th, 2001, Lauren Hayes stood at the edge of her office on the 110th floor of the World Trade Center's South Tower, gazing out at Manhattan's skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass. She was 38, a sharp-witted executive who'd clawed her way up from a small-town life, her desk cluttered with a high-end laptop, a sleek tablet, and a coffee mug stamped with Boss Lady. Her smartphone buzzed. 8:46 a.m. A text from her. Assistant Jen. "Plane hit North Tower, you okay?" Lauren frowned, peering across at the smoke rising opposite her. Then the floor jolted, a distant boom shaking her world. She tapped her tablet, pulling up a news stream, live footage of the North Tower burning. Her breath quickened, but she steadied herself. Lauren wasn't the type to crumble. She'd faced boardroom battles and a messy divorce with the same cool head. Yet something felt off. The office intercom crackled, a faint murmur beneath the static. Not the usual evacuation tone, but a voice, soft, indistinct. She muted the tablet, straining to hear, but it stopped. A glitch, she thought, brushing it off as she grabbed her phone to call Jen downstairs. The call connected, but before Jen could speak, a whisper cut through. Lauren, her name clear as day, not Jen's voice. Lower, older, familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. She yanked the phone from her ear, staring at it. The screen showed call ended, though she hadn't hung up. Her smartwatch pulsed. Heart, rate spiking, and the office lights flickered, casting her reflection in the glass. A lone figure against a burning horizon. She shook her head, chalking it up to stress, but the air grew heavy, oppressive. Lauren crossed to her desk, fingers hovering over the intercom to call security. It buzzed before she touched it, that same voice again. "Stay." She recoiled, heart thudding. The tablet flared to life unprompted, its screen glitching, random pixels forming a face, then dissolving. She'd seen that face before, in Nightmares from childhood after her sister drowned, a guilt she'd buried deep. Her throat tightened. This wasn't happening. Not now. The building trembled again, a second explosion, this time closer, deafening. Lauren stumbled to the window, gasping as flames erupted from the North Tower's twin wounds. Her phone rang, Jen again, but when she answered, it wasn't Jen. "You can't leave," the voice said, layered now, a chorus of murmurs. She dropped the phone, its screen cracking on the floor, and the intercom blared, "Lauren, Lauren." She clapped her hands over her ears, but the sound burrowed in, relentless. She wasn't alone anymore. The office, her sanctuary of polished wood and tech, felt alive, watching, listening. Her laptop pinged, a notification. Meeting canceled. Eternity. She hadn't scheduled that. The tablet's camera light blinked on, red and unblinking, and she swore it tracked her as she backed away. Outside, screams rose faintly through the glass, but inside the echoes grew louder, calling her name from every device, every corner. Then a single word cut through the chaos, sharp and cold. "Look." Lauren turned, trembling, to the window. Her reflection stared back, not just hers, but another figure behind her, blurred. Too tall, too still. She spun, but the office was empty. The echoes, xiao liao, if whispers could laugh, and the glass vibrated, a low hum that promised something worse was coming. Lauren's hands shook as she grabbed her bag, shoving her tablet inside, anything to silence it. The office lights flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows across the walls. She bolted for the door, but the electronic lock beeped red, jammed, like the building itself wanted her to stay. Her phone buzzed on the floor, screen glowing through the cracks. "Don't go." She kicked it away, heart pounding, and pried at the door with her nails, desperation overtaking reason. The echoes followed, spilling from the intercom. "Lauren, we see you." The South Tower rocked again, a sickening lurch that flung her against the desk. Papers scattered, her coffee mug shattering. She clutched the edge, gasping as the tablet slid free from her bag, its screen alive with static. The pixels shifted, forming words. "You left me." Her stomach twisted. Those were her sister's words, spoken in a fight years ago, the night before the accident. Lauren had ignored her calls after, until it was too late. Now, the tablet pulsed, the camera light glaring like an accusing eye. She smashed the device against the desk, cracking its glass, but the voices didn't stop. They leapt to the intercom, the laptop, even her smartwatch now buzzing on her wrist. "You can't run." Lauren tore it off, hurling it at the window. The glass held, but the impact sparked a memory. Her sister's voice, pleading through a storm, drowned out by rain. Guilt clawed at her, sharper than the smoke seeping under the door. The building was burning, and she was trapped with her past. A new sound joined the chaos, a faint tapping, rhythmic from the hall. Lauren froze, hope flickering. Survivors? Rescue? She banged on the door, shouting, "I'm here!" The tapping stopped, replaced by a whisper, closer now from the other side. "Let us in." Her blood ran cold. That wasn't human. The lock buzzed, green for a heartbeat, then red again. She backed away, eyes darting to the window, the only exit left. The laptop flared, its screen showing not her office but the 110th floor's observation deck. Empty, pristine, as if the attack never happened. A figure stood there, small, facing, away, her sister's frame unmistakable. Lauren's breath hitched. "Katie," she whispered, though she knew it couldn't be real. The figure turned, face obscured by static, and the screen cut to Lauren herself standing in the office, staring at the laptop. Live. Behind her, the same figure loomed, closer now. She spun, but the room was empty, except for the echoes, louder, angrier. "You forgot me." Lauren's knees buckled. She hadn't forgotten, she'd buried it. The guilt of moving on while Katie stayed frozen at 16. The intercom crackled, a child's voice now. "Why didn't you save me?" Tears stung her eyes as she stumbled to the window, pounding on it. 90 floors below, the plaza churned with chaos. Too far to jump, too late to climb. A secondary character entered the fray. Mark, her colleague from across the hall, his voice cutting through the static. "Lauren, open the door." She whirled, hope surging, but the intercom twisted his words. "Lauren, let us in." It wasn't Mark, not anymore. The tapping resumed, faster, insistent, and the lock buzzed again. Green, then red, green, then red. She screamed, "Mark, are you there?" No answer, just the echoes laughing, layering his voice into theirs. The air thickened, smoke curling in, stinging her lungs. The tablet, cracked but alive, pinged, a notification. "Incoming call, Katie." Lauren's hands trembled as she swiped it away, but it rang again, relentless. She answered, voice breaking, "Katie, I'm sorry." Static roared back, then silence, until a giggle, high and wrong, echoed through the speaker. The screen flashed. "Look behind you." She didn't want to, but she did. Nothing, just smoke and flickering lights. Relief flickered, then died as the window hummed again. Louder, a chorus of voices pressing against the glass. Lauren backed away, tripping over her chair, as the laptop showed the observation deck again. Dozens of figures now, all facing her, their mouths moving silently. The tablet vibrated, words scrolling. "We're waiting." Her chest tightened. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The building groaned, steel bending, and a crack split the ceiling, dust raining down. Lauren coughed, crawling to the door, but the tapping stopped. The intercom hissed, "You're ours." Her phone buzzed, screen lighting up. A photo of her, office, her crouched there, taken from above. She looked up, nothing but plaster and smoke. The echoes swelled, a tidal wave of sound, drowning her screams. Mark's voice broke through again, real this time. "Lauren, hold on." She lunged for the door, hope flaring, but the lock stayed red. The tablet pinged. A video call, no caller ID. Against her will, she answered. Katie's face filled the screen, pale, eyeless, smiling. "You're late," she said, and the call cut to static. Lauren dropped it, sobbing as the window cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading fast. The voices unified, a single command. "Jump." Lauren froze, staring at the glass. 90 floors, no chance. But the echoes pushed, relentless, her sister's voice loudest. "Do it." She pressed her hands to the window, feeling its give as the building shook harder, floors collapsing below. The laptop showed her reflection, but Katie stood behind her now, hands on her shoulders, cold even through the screen. Smoke choked the room, her vision blurring. Lauren pounded the door again, screaming for Mark, but the echoes drowned him out. "He's gone." She didn't know if it was true, just that she was alone, or worse, not alone at all. The tablet buzzed, a countdown appearing. 1945, 1944. The South Tower's final minutes. She sank to her knees, the voices a hymn now, pulling her under. A thud shook the door, real, heavy. "Lauren?" Mark's voice, faint but alive. She scrambled up, hope flickering, but the lock buzzed red. The window groaned, shards falling, and the echoes laughed. Too late. Her reflection in the glass shifted, Katie's face over hers, eyeless, grinning. Lauren clawed at the door, nails breaking as the countdown hit 18. The ceiling buckled, a beam crashing down inches from her. She ducked, coughing as the tablet flared one last time. "Join us." The voices roared, a wall of sound. Katie, Mark, strangers, begging, cursing, pleading. Lauren pressed her back to the door, eyes on the window, the drop calling her. She wouldn't jump, she'd fight. But the echoes knew her, deeper than she knew herself. Lauren's back pressed against the door, the metal vibrating as the South Tower shuddered toward collapse. The countdown on the tablet read 1732, each tick a knife to her resolve. The voices, Katie's, Mark's, 100 others, swelled. From every device, a chorus of rage and sorrow that pinned her in place. She clawed at the lock, fingers bloody, but it stayed red, defiant. The window cracked wider, wind howling in, thick with ash and the stench of burning jet fuel. She wouldn't. Jump not yet, but the echoes pushed, relentless. Come with us. The tablet flared, its screen a kaleidoscope of faces. Katie's eyeless grin, Mark's panicked stare, strangers she'd passed in the halls, all screaming her name. Lauren smashed it against the floor, shards flying, but the voices leapt. To the intercom, the laptop, the air itself. You owe us. Her chest heaved, guilt crashing in. Owe them? She'd failed Katie, yes, but Mark? The others? The building rocked a deafening groan, and she realized this wasn't just her past. It was the towers. A twist hit her, brutal and clear. The echoes weren't random. They were the dead. Those already lost in the North Tower, those burning below, reaching up through the tech she'd trusted. Her laptop pinged, screen splitting. Live feeds from the building. A man trapped in an elevator pounding the walls. A woman clawing at a sealed stairwell. Mark, in the hall outside, slamming a fire axe into her door. Lauren gasped, "Mark!" But his feed cut to static, his scream echoing in her skull. She lunged for the door, pounding back. "I'm here!" The axe struck again, metal denting, but the voices laughed, drowning him out. "He's ours now." The tablet, cracked but alive, showed him stumble, his face twisting as if he heard them too. Lauren's knees buckled. Had she brought this on him? The countdown hit 16 round and the room tilted, furniture sliding, as the echoes sharpened into a command. "Look." She turned, trembling, to the window. The glass was a mirror now, reflecting not the sky but a void, black, endless, with figures pressing against it, hands clawing, mouths gaping. Katie stood closest, her eyeless face, inches from Lauren's, whispering through the cracks. "You left me to die." Lauren screamed, "I didn't mean to." But the void pulsed, pulling at her, not her body, but her mind, her soul. The laptop showed it too, her reflection dissolving, joining them. A choice loomed, fight the door or face the echoes. She grabbed a chair, smashing it into the window, glass shattering outward, but the void didn't retreat. Wind tore through, papers swirling, and the voices roared, "Jump!" Lauren staggered back, coughing on smoke as the ceiling buckled again, beams groaning. The tablet buzzed a final message. "You're already here." Her reflection in the screen wasn't hers anymore. Katie's face, superimposed, smiled. The door, dented inward, Mark's axe breaking through. "Lauren, hold on." His voice was real, raw, but the echoes twisted it. Too late. She clawed at the gap, fingers brushing his glove, hope surging, until the tablet flared, showing him yanked, back swallowed by smoke. Lauren screamed his name, but the void answered, a hand, Katie's, reaching from the screen, cold fingers grazing her wrist. She yanked free, falling as the countdown hit 14:30. The climax erupted as the void spilled into the room. Not an image, but real. A wall of shadow and sound crashing over her. Faces emerged. Katie, Mark, countless others grabbing at her clothes, her hair, her mind. Lauren swung the chair, hitting nothing but air, as the voices chanted, "Ours, ours." The building tilted hard, floors collapsing below, and she felt it, a pull not just physical, dragging her toward the window, the void, the end. She crawled to the door. Mark's axe marks her lifeline, but the shadow tightened, cold and electric. The tablet pulsed, Katie's voice soft now. "Let go." Lauren sobbed, "I can't." But the faces pressed closer, their eyes, Mark's included, black, hollow, pleading. The countdown hit 13 hours, and the room spun, walls cracking as the void swallowed the light. She was losing herself, her fight, everything. A final twist. It wasn't just the dead. It was her guilt, her fear, given form by the tower's agony, amplified through the tech she'd lived by. The laptop showed her now, not Katie, reaching from the void, her own hands pulling her in. Lauren screamed, kicking free, but the shadow clung, whispering her secrets, every failure, every regret. The door splintered, Mark's hand breaking through, but the void roared louder, claiming her. And then silence. The shadow retreated, the tablet went dark, and Lauren lay gasping, Mark's hand grasping hers through the gap. She'd won, or had she? The countdown ticked, 11:59. The tower groaned, final, and she felt it still. A whisper, faint in her ear. "We'll wait." Lauren clung to Mark's hand, his grip yanking her through the splintered door as the 110th floor buckled. Smoke choked the hall, fire licking up the walls, but he pulled her forward, shouting, "Stairs! Now!" They ran, stumbling over debris. The countdown burned into her mind. 11:30 when they hit the stairwell. The echoes faded, drowned by real screams, real heat. But she felt them still, a weight on her chest, watching. 90 floors down, they burst into daylight, collapsing in the plaza as the south tower crumbled behind them, a roar of dust and steel. She coughed, ash coating her throat, and gripped Mark's arm. He was alive, sweaty, battered, real. "You heard them too?" she rasped. He nodded, eyes haunted, but said nothing. Paramedics swarmed, radios crackling, and Lauren scanned the chaos, phones, cameras, screens everywhere. Her stomach twisted. The voices had come through tech, her tech. She'd left her tablet, her lifeline in the office, buried now, but the fear lingered. Had they followed her out? Days later, in a hospital bed, Lauren pieced it together. Katie's face, Mark's screams, the others. Guilt had fueled it, but the tower's collapse had birthed it. A wound in reality spilling through circuits and screens. Mark visited, quiet, his hands bandaged from the axe. "It's over," he said, but she saw it in his flinch when a TV flickered nearby. Her phone, recovered from the wreckage, sat silent until it buzzed one night, screen lighting up. Missed call, unknown. She didn't answer. She moved on. New job, no corner, office, no smart devices beyond a basic flip phone, but mirrors haunted her. In every reflection, glass, water, polished steel, she saw a flicker. Katie's eyeless stare, Mark's hollow gaze, her own face, distorted. The echoes didn't speak again, but they didn't need to. She felt them, waiting, patient as the dust that still clung to her lungs. Years passed, and Lauren told herself she'd survived. But late at night, when the city hummed with distant sirens, her TV would hum too, soft static, a whisper beneath it, calling her name. She'd unplug, it heart racing and wonder, had she escaped the tower or brought it with her? What if the cameras watching you started watching back? On September 11th, 2001, Daniel Rivera sat in the North Tower's security control room, a concrete box tucked below the lobby, surrounded by a wall of monitors. He was 29, a wiry guy with a knack for tech, who'd taken the overnight shift to pay off his student loans. His smartphone rested beside a half-empty Red Bull, its screen glowing with a podcast paused mid-sentence. At 8:46 a.m., the building shook, a low, violent rumble, and the feeds flickered, showing smoke pouring from the upper floors. Daniel's gut clenched. This wasn't a drill. He tapped the console, switching cameras, lobby, stairwells, offices, all chaos now, people running, shouting. His headset buzzed with static, the supervisor's voice cutting in. "Plane hit us, get visuals now." Daniel nodded, even though no one could see, his fingers flying over the controls. The room was his domain, dozens of screens, a high-tech DVR system, and a laptop streaming live data. But as he zoomed in on the 90th floor, something caught his eye. A shadow, tall and blurred, standing still amid the panic. He blinked, leaning closer. The feed was grainy, but the shadow didn't move. No fleeing, no stumbling, just there. Daniel switched angles, another camera, same floor. It was gone. Relief flickered, then died as he flipped back. The shadow reappeared closer to the lens, its edges rippling like liquid. His mouth went dry. He'd worked nights for years, seen glitches, but this wasn't pixel noise. It felt alive. His smartwatch beeped, heart rate climbing, and the room's air grew thick, heavy with something he couldn't name. Daniel's past nudged him, a memory of his abuela's stories, shadows that followed bad omens. He'd laughed them off as a kid, but now sweat beaded on his neck. He grabbed the radio, voice steady. "Control to base, we've got something weird on 90. Static answered, then a scream, cut off fast. The monitors flickered again and the shadow shifted, now on the 85th floor feed, standing over a desk where a woman had just been. She was gone. He punched the emergency line on his phone, but it rang dead, no signal. The laptop pinged, a system. "Alert! Unauthorized access detected." Daniel frowned. He hadn't logged out. The screen synced suddenly, all showing the same image, the lobby, packed with evacuees, and there, in the corner, the shadow, taller now, sharper. His headset crackled. Daniel. His name, whispered, not his supervisor's voice, something deeper, colder. He ripped it off, heart hammering. The control room's lights dimmed, the hum of the DVR growing erratic. Daniel stood, chair scraping, and checked the door, locked from the inside, as always. Safe, he thought, until the screens flickered again. The shadow was in the stairwell now, descending, its head tilted as if listening. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Look closer." He didn't want to, but he did, zooming in. The shadow's face was blank, no eyes, no mouth. But it turned, staring straight into the camera, straight at him. And then, the power surged, monitors blaring white before settling. The shadow was gone, but Daniel felt it, a chill creeping up his spine like eyes boring into him from the dark. The building shook again, harder, and he knew, whatever this was, it wasn't leaving. It was coming. Daniel's hands trembled as he switched feeds again, searching for the shadow. The screen showed chaos, smoke clogging the 80th floor, a man pounding a locked exit, stairwells jammed, but no sign of it. He exhaled, shaky, until the lobby, feed flickered. There it was, gliding through the crowd untouched by the panic. He grabbed the radio, shouting, "Base, we've got an intruder! Something's moving down here!" Static roared back, then silence. The shadow paused, turning toward a camera he hadn't touched, and the screen zoomed in on its own. He dropped the radio, cursing under his breath. The control room's tech was his lifeline. Cameras, radios, a smart lock system, but now it felt like a trap. His laptop pinged again. Access granted. The DVR whirred, rewinding without command, showing footage from 8:30 a.m. Him, alone, sipping Red Bull, oblivious. The shadow flickered into the frame, standing behind him. Unseen then, but clear now. Daniel's stomach lurched. It had been here. Before the plane. Before everything. He yanked the DVR's power cord, but the screen stayed alive, looping the clip. His phone buzzed, another text. "You saw me." Daniel's hands went cold. He hadn't told anyone, not even his ex, Clara, who'd teased his paranoid streak during their breakup. The shadow moved again, now on the 50th floor, bending, over a fallen guard. The feed cut, then returned. The guard was gone, the shadow taller, darker. A voice broke through the headset, unplugged on the desk. "Daniel, help us." He recognized it. Mike, a janitor he'd shared beers with last week. Mike worked the high floors. "Mike," Daniel yelled, grabbing the mic, but the voice twisted. "Help. Me." A scream followed, wet and final, and the 5th floor feed showed Mike's mop abandoned in a pool of blood. The shadow stood over it, growing. Daniel's mind raced. He had to warn someone. He banged the console, pulling up the PA system, but the mic spat static, then his own voice. "Stay where you are." He hadn't said that. The screens flickered, every feed now showing the shadow. Different floors, different angles, always closer. His smartwatch buzzed. A notification. "Intruder alert. Control room. He spun, but the room was empty, except for the monitors where the shadow loomed larger, its blank face tilting. The building groaned, a deep crack splitting the ceiling, dust choking the air. Daniel coughed, grabbing his phone to call Clara, someone, anyone. But the screen froze, displaying a live feed. The control room, him at the console and the shadow behind him inches away. He whipped around. Nothing. Back on the screen it stayed, motionless, waiting. His abuela's words echoed. Shadows don't lie, mijo. He hadn't believed her, until now. A new figure entered the chaos. Leela, a fellow tech, her voice crackling over the radio. Dan, you there? We're evacuating. He lunged for it, shouting, Lila, get out. Something's here. The line cut, and the screens showed her in the basement, running, until the shadow appeared ahead, blocking her path. She froze, screaming, and the feed went black. Daniel slammed the console, no, but the shadow reappeared, on his floor now, outside the door. The lock buzzed, red to green, then back. Daniel backed away, heart in his throat, as the shadow filled the hall feed, tall, fluid, pressing against the glass. The laptop pinged. A photo. Lila, crumpled, eyes blank, time-stamped seconds ago. He gagged, tears stinging, as the shadow tapped the door, slow, deliberate. The screen synced. Let me in. His voice stolen, pleading. Smoke seeped in, the building trembling harder, floors collapsing above. Daniel grabbed a wrench from his toolkit, clutching it like a lifeline. The shadow slid under the door, not through, but beneath, a black smear. Pooling on the floor, he swung, hitting concrete as it reformed, taller, sharper, faceless yet somehow smirking. The phone buzzed, a video call, no ID. He answered, shaking. The screen showed Clara, his ex, sitting in her Queens apartment staring blankly. Dan, she said flat, you didn't listen. The call cut to static, then him, live, in the room, the shadow looming. He dropped the phone, its crack echoing as the shadow whispered, not from tech but the air, I've always watched you. The wrench slipped from his hand, useless. The DVR flared, replaying every shift he'd ever worked. Nights alone, the shadow in every frame, unnoticed. Until now, Daniel's knees buckled. It wasn't new, it was his. The building shook, a final roar, and the screens showed the plaza, people fleeing, the shadow weaving through, growing with each scream. His watch buzzed, countdown, 56, 55, 59, the North Tower's end ticking down. He lunged for the door, wrench in hand, smashing the lock. It buzzed green, open, but the shadow slid ahead, blocking it. The screens flared, every feed now him, trapped, the shadow circling. A whisper, soft, intimate. You're mine. Daniel screamed, swinging, as the room filled with smoke, the shadow's edges brushing his skin, cold, alive. The countdown hit 54 young. The shadow retreated, melting into the screens, but its chill stayed, clinging. Daniel kicked the door, stumbling into the hall, smoke, heat, chaos, but the monitors followed, mounted along the walls, showing him running. The shadow, pacing behind, he wasn't free, it was playing with him. Daniel burst into the hall, wrench clutched tight, the control room screen still glaring at him from every angle. The countdown on his watch read 53:45, each second a pulse of dread. Smoke burned his lungs, the North Tower, trembling as steel, snapped somewhere above. The shadow flickered on the hall monitors, behind him, ahead, everywhere, its blank face tilting, tracking. He swung the wrench at a screen, glass shattering, but it reformed on the next, closer now, whispering his name in his own voice, Daniel. He ran, boots pounding concrete, the wrench his only anchor. The shadow slid across the feeds, fluid, relentless, matching his pace. A stairwell loomed ahead, jammed with people shoving downward, their screams drowning the whisper. Daniel shouted, "Move! shoving through, but the wall-mounted TVs flared, the shadow in the crowd inches from a woman who didn't see it. She vanished from the next frame, gone, and Daniel's stomach twisted. He couldn't warn them all. The building lurched, throwing him against the rail. Dust rained, a crack splitting the wall, and the screens pulsed red, showing not the stairwell, but the control room empty now except for the shadow standing where he'd been. It turned, faceless, and the whisper grew. "You let me in." Daniel froze, mind reeling. Let it in. He'd fixed cameras, not unleashed. Then it hit him. A glitch last month, a feed he'd ignored, static he'd dismissed. His hands shook. Had he opened the door? The shadow swelled, filling every monitor, its edges bleeding into the air. Real now, not just pixels. Daniel swung the wrench, hitting nothing as it loomed over him, cold radiating from its form. The crowd thinned, some falling, some gone, and he saw it. The shadow wasn't chasing him. It was hurting him. The stairwell feed showed the basement, ahead, but the shadow blocked it, a wall of black. He had to choose, up, back, or through it. He charged downward, wrench raised, screaming, "Get out of my way!" The shadow parted, like smoke, like oil, letting him pass, but its chill clung, sinking into his bones. The screens flared. Clara's face again, eyes black, mouthing, "You can't." Daniel stumbled, nearly dropping the wrench as the whisper laughed, "She's mine too." Guilt stabbed him. Clara, Lila, Mike. He'd failed them all, or, worse, fed them to it. The basement loomed, a cavern of pipes and flickering lights, the crowd scattering into tunnels. Daniel hit the floor, gasping, but the shadow followed, on a security kiosk screen now, then gone, then real, pooling, at his feet. He swung, concrete sparking as it rose, taller, sharper, its blank face splitting into a grin he felt more than saw. The countdown hit 50 words and the tower roared, a death knell shaking the walls. A twist slammed him. The shadow wasn't his creation. It was the tower's, born from every eye it had watched, every scream it had swallowed, given form through the tech he'd tended. The screens showed it now, hundreds of faces fleeting pressed into its mass. Mike, Lila, strangers, all staring. Daniel's wrench fell, useless, as it whispered, "We're you." Not just his guilt, everyone's alive in the circuits claiming him. He ran again deeper into the basement, the shadow pacing him, slow, deliberate, savoring. A tunnel split ahead, left to the plaza, right to nowhere. He veered left, hope flickering, but the kiosk flared. Him running, the shadow's hand on his shoulder, live. He spun, swinging, hitting air, but the cold tightened, pulling. The countdown hit 48:30, and the ceiling buckled, pipes bursting, water flooding the floor. The climax peaked as the shadow lunged, not from screens, but the dark, a mass of hands and eyes wrapping him. Daniel screamed, thrashing, the wrench gone, his fists pounding nothing. Voices roared, Mike's, Lila's, Clara's, begging, cursing, pulling him down. The water rose, cold and black, and he felt it, his mind fraying, his body not his own. The screens flared one last time, his face joining the mass, eyes blank. He kicked free, crawling, the shadow retreating into the flood, laughing, low, final. Daniel stumbled toward the plaza, the tower's groan deafening. But the chill stayed, a handprint burned into his shoulder he couldn't see. The countdown hit 47 Derauch. He'd escaped, or had he? The whisper lingered, soft, in his ear. "I'll find you." Daniel splashed through the basement, water soaking his jeans. The plaza's light a faint glow ahead. The shadow was gone, dissolved into the flood, the screens dead. But its weight clung, a shiver he couldn't shake. The north tower collapsed, above a thunderous roar shaking the earth, and he burst into daylight, falling to his knees amid ash and screams. Paramedics grabbed him, shouting, but he barely heard, his eyes locked on a shattered TV in the debris, its blank screen reflecting nothing. He coughed, spitting black as they dragged him to an ambulance. His phone was gone, lost in the tunnel, but his smartwatch buzzed. Rebooted, no countdown, just time, 9:58 a.m. He laughed, ragged, alive. until a bystander's camera clicked nearby, its flash catching his eye. He flinched, half expecting the shadow in the lens, but it was just him, wild-haired, hollow-eyed, human. The medic asked, "You okay?" Daniel nodded, lying, the wrench still tight in his fist. Weeks later, in a Brooklyn apartment, Daniel avoided screens. No TV, no laptop, just a radio he rarely touched. Clara called once, safe, shaken, but he didn't answer. Her voice felt too close to the whisper. Work sent a package, his recovered badge, streaked with ash, and a security log. Entries he didn't remember writing. Shadow detected, 3. Ammon ignored. His gut twisted. It had been there always, and he'd looked away. Nights were worst. Streetlights flickered outside, casting shapes on his walls, and he'd check every time, finding nothing. But mirrors caught him off guard, a flicker in his eyes. Dark, fleeting, gone when he blinked. The shadow hadn't followed. It was in him, a stain from the tower, waiting. He slept with the wrench by his bed, useless but heavy, a tether to who he'd been. Years on, he'd tell himself it was over, the shadow buried with the rubble, a trick of fear and smoke. But late at night, when the city quieted, his radio would hum, soft static, a whisper beneath. Daniel. He'd unplug, it heart racing, and wonder, had he escaped the screen or become it? They heard the whispers, through static, screens, glass, voices that shouldn't speak, calling their names from a tower doomed to fall. 6 stories, 6 souls, trapped in the terror of that day, where tech turned against them and the dead refused to stay silent. What would you do if your phone rang with a voice you buried? Or if your reflection stared back with someone else's eyes? Leave a comment below. Tell us what chilled you most. Share your own eerie experiences with tech gone wrong, or drop a creepy idea for our next video. If these nightmares hooked you, smash that subscribe button now. These aren't just tales, they're warnings from September 11's ashes. Hit the bell. Next time it might call your name. We're waiting for your suggestions. What horror should we dig into next?